The World Health Organization, WHO, has released a new guideline on non-sugar sweeteners, or NSS, which recommends against the use of these NSS to control body weight or reduce the risk of non-communicable diseases. The recommendation is based on the findings of a systematic review of the available evidence, which suggests that use of NSS does not confer any long-term benefits in reducing body fat in adults and children. Results of the review also suggest that there may be potential undesirable effects from long-term use of non-sugar sweeteners, such as increased risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and mortality in adults. Quote, replacing free sugars with NSS does not help with weight control in the long term. People need to consider other ways to reduce free sugars, such as consuming food with naturally occurring sugars like fruit or unsweetened food and beverages, unquote, says Francesco Branca, WHO Director for Nutrition and Food Safety. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. That was not on purpose. Quote, NSS are not essential dietary factors and have no nutritional value. People should reduce the sweetness of the diet altogether, starting early in life to improve their health, unquote. The recommendation applies to all people except individuals with pre-existing diabetes and includes all systematic and naturally occurring or modified non-nutritive sweeteners that are not classified as sugars found in manufactured foods and beverages or sold on their own to be added to foods and beverages by consumers. Common NSS include aspartame, saccharin, sucralose, stevia, and stevia derivatives. The recommendation does not apply to personal care and hygiene products containing non-sugar sweeteners such as toothpaste, skin cream, and medications, or to the low-calorie sugars and sugar alcohol polyols. Did I say that
Polyols.
right? Polyols, yeah. Okay, which are sugars or sugar derivatives containing calories and are therefore not considered NSS, because the link observed in the evidence between NSS and disease outcomes might be confounded by baseline characteristics of study participants and complicated patterns of NSS use. The recommendation has been assessed as conditional following WHO process for developing guidelines. This signals that policy decisions based on this recommendation may require substantive discussion in specific country contexts, linked, for example, to the extent of consumption in different age groups. Okay, that was a huge amount of reading for me because of my small brain. What are we talking about here? Non-sugar sweeteners. I thought we just said they're not the end of the world.
So basically, well, that's part of the difference is that this does not include sugar alcohols. I know it was mentioned in there, but I think it needs emphasized.
Okay, that's what that meant.
Yes.
Oh.
So the sugar alcohols are like xylitol, sorbitol, the things that end in tol. Okay, that's the TOL. That's where you're going to typically see those. They're 25 to 100% of sweetest sugar.
Okay.
They carry, the calories are a little controversial about how they're processed, but there's very small amount of calories per gram, about 2.6, depending on the source or how you break it down. So that's, I think, one key thing. Then the other complicating thing is that stevia is included. Because like in my mind, I kind of like lump stevia in with the sugar alcohols.
Okay.
Because of it being natural.
Yeah.
But in this case, and rightfully so by the definition they're using, it is more lumped in with the aspartames and the saccharins / Splendas, all those things that have been around for a long time. Stevia is included in that bucket for these purposes. Sugar alcohols are not.
Okay, so this is talking specifically about what you mentioned before, the chemical sweeteners.
Yes. So your brand names, again, Splenda does include stevia as well, but then, sucralose.
That sweet and low,
all that stuff.
Equal,
all those things
all those.
That since even we were kids were in the little packets at the diner, all that stuff except for the actual sugar, of course.
Okay, all right.
But it's stuff that's in Diet Coke, all that.
So they're saying it's not useful for weight loss or reducing risk of diabetes or all those things, right?
Pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
And this is based on a massive review of the available data.
Mm-hmm. Now, for the most part, from my understanding, the data that they pulled together, they were all observational studies, and so it's somewhere in this write up they they do say that this is a conditional recommendation. So this is not like, hasn't made its way to policy quite yet or anything.
Right.
So maybe some things will change, or there's certain things that they'll soften on eventually. Who knows? But I think that was just an important part to distinguish. Now,
so this isn't as settled as like cigarettes cause cancer.
Exactly.
Okay.
But again, like, you see the WHO comes out with a consensus statement like this. It can cause public confusion, worry, concern, all types of things. I mean, it's kind of been everywhere, and especially at least in the in the bubble that I'm in a bit, that talks about the potential benefits, in terms of weight loss and all those sorts of things, substituting these non-nutritive sweeteners for sugar sweetened beverages and how it has helped people. It's a bit jarring to read this from such a, large organization, really.
Yeah.
And so I think hopefully that's what we can unpack is there's still, even though this is a pretty black and white statement, there are still critiques. There's still nuance to it. There's still, still a general vibe of not to view this as sort of the end of the world, in my opinion.
Okay. So before we do that, what they're saying is these things are not good for all of the purported benefits. They're not useful. They should probably just be avoided. Sugar would probably just be better. Is that the punchline?
They're not quite going that far. They're not saying sugar is better. They're just saying that they can't recommend replacing it. So that's where some of the semantics come in. Because with a lot of these things, it's still just, to me, so much about moderation.
Yeah.
Like what individually are the people doing? I still find it very hard to believe that if I have 2 Diet Cokes a week, 3 or 4 a month, that would be better off having the Coke.
Yeah.
Now, you know what I mean? And I think the other thing is then they start comparing on the other end of this. You can't compare Diet Coke to water either. You can't say, well, there's Coke here, and then it's just pick Diet Coke or water. They're the same thing. I think that's crazy too. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So I think, and no, I'm kind of going all over the place, but I do think a lot of these points are ultimately what we want to hammer home is that kind of discussion about what do you do with this information, with this headline, and then these 90 pages that I printed out a couple hours ago.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
that's a good point, with the water comparison as well. Because again, this is not the first time that, non-nutritive sweetened beverages or food products have come up in conversation. And so
won't be the last either.
Yeah. And nobody, and I don't think any of us, I think it would be easy to misconstrue this idea, but nobody's saying that you should substitute, Diet Coke for water.
Right.
No one was saying substitute Gatorade Zero for water.
Right.
So that's
even that big quote in there said people need to move to a less sweetened diet overall. Just eat sweeter things, less sweet things.
And one of the reasons for something like that, because even I have young kids and that's been on my mind. Essentially we go to, we do shop at Whole Foods a lot.
Yeah.
Because we value what kind of food we have. Not that's the only way to do it. But I like that they have certain ingredients that just aren't in there.
Yeah.
So sugar alcohols are in there. Stevia is in there. It's like the only pop my kids know has the stevia in it, but none of the artificial sweeteners. But at the same time, I've definitely thought a lot about, I'm still giving my kids sweet stuff.
Right.
I'm still turning on their brain to sweet things. And I know that that's not quite the route to go either. Because, it's not like, hey, you can go to Whole Foods and eat anything in there. Some of it's packed with sugar and some of it's packed with stevia, so those kind of, and I think what's key though is, and they have it in a couple different points here, but there's more than just sweet taste receptors in your mouth.
Right.
They're in your GI tract. Okay. They're in the pancreas, they're in the brain, and they're in adipose tissue. So yes, the start is oral, but you are sending signals to the rest of your body. Sugar's coming.
Wow.
And so that's again why I'm going to keep harping on the water thing. Like Dante said, nobody's saying drink Diet Coke instead of water. They're the same.
Right.
That's you've got to know still kind of what you're doing here.
Am I correct in thinking that even the non-nutritive sweeteners and stevias and all of them, that they all, is it dopamine that they light up the same as sugar?
Great point. Yes.
So in terms of neurologically speaking, it triggers the same thing.
Any food can do it. Like we've talked about, gambling can do it. Obviously,
Right.
certain medications, drugs can do it. But yes, fatty food can do it. Sugar, but
Okay.
yes, everybody's a little bit different, and it does seem like the sweets are what the average person kind of gets lit up by.
Yeah.
So that is a great point in terms of that reward, that dopamine center that does feed into already complicated issues like health and fitness and diet.
22 episodes in, I made a great point. Okay, so what do we do about this? What else? You had some other things you wanted to talk about that were adding shades of gray to this whole thing.
Yeah. No, I know I mentioned like at the outset as well that this is most of what has led them to this conclusion has come from observational studies looking at all of these different sweeteners. So there's no, again, just by default, there's no way to prove a causal relationship between,
Right.
let's say, Splenda and cardiovascular disease,
Right.
or stevia and metabolic disease, whatever. So the shade of gray, I think, in that case would be that there are randomized control trials that have felt fairly strong, that are fairly strongly powered, that are to the point where you could make a recommendation to a patient that have shown that making a substitute or using a head-to-head comparison of whatever non-nutritive sweetener it is versus a sugar-sweetened beverage. I think there was a study that looked at younger children and weight loss, and that substitution over a short period of time did help children lose weight.
Sure.
And so
That was one of the things I was like, how is it that there's no weight loss benefit when you're reducing your caloric intake?
Yeah. So it's tough. I mean, that's one randomized control trial. I'm
Right.
not saying that to totally refute what's seen in the observational trials. It's just that there's so much out there with this that, over a short period of time, as far as like a stepping stone, whether it's a young adult or, whoever that's sort of on a weight loss journey or whatever, that these, putting a little bit of Splenda or stevia in your yogurt instead of having the one that has 15 grams of sugar in it.
Right.
I mean, come on. Like that's a decent place to start for somebody.
Yeah,
on a practical
when you're
level.
talking about moderation, I'm just never not going to agree with that.
Right.
I mean, I can't imagine what the study would have to look like for me to think that
Sure.
you're still better off doing those 15 grams of sugar.
Right.
It's just whenever it starts going, like everything else starts going just way out of hand.
Yeah.
Yeah. And before I lose this train of thought,
Yeah.
so we talked about this being mainly observational studies. There are randomized control trials that do show that there could be some benefit when substituting in terms of weight loss specifically. And then the third layer to that, looking back at some of the observational data, would be that there is the potential for reverse causality. And so that a lot of the, is it the sweeteners that are leading to these disease states that we're seeing down line, or is it those with the disease states who are adding Splenda, adding stevia on top of
Right.
already drinking
Yeah.
sugar sweetened beverages and highly processed foods that have sugar and
Yeah.
Splenda? You
Yeah.
know what I mean? It's like there's so much there.
I
That,
wondered that because there was a carve out in the quote I read that said something about diabetes. This doesn't apply to people with diabetes.
Mhm.
And I thought, is that because they've already done the damage and now this is the best option for not making things worse?
Yeah, as much as the brain, so to speak, recognizes sweet,
Yeah.
it's these non-nutritive sweeteners don't cause the same spike in blood sugar and
Insulin.
spike in
Yeah, yeah,
insulin.
yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no, it doesn't do the same thing physiologically. There might be like a little, tidbit of insulin or whatever that gets released from the whatever is triggered in the brain, and
Yeah.
it might make for kind of a compelling story, but it's not doing the same thing as sugar as far as your serum glucose, so to speak.
Makes
The
sense.
diabetic body literally cannot handle glucose.
Right.
And that's all. Yeah. So, but that's still, when you're tying it all together, I think still is an interesting way, like hold up here, so we're going to start trying to swing this pendulum back to sugar.
Right.
Like of all things.
Yeah.
And I think too, a lot of the studies were different. But a lot of the studies, they were just allowing people to eat normal and then just swapping out sugar and for NSS.
Yeah.
And you say, okay, well, that sounds reasonable. But a lot of the people, if you're consuming a lot of sugar daily, enough that you're going to make an impact in a study's results, you're probably not eating a real good diet.
Yeah.
And so what I mean by that is you kind of just went from, this is an exaggeration, but you kind of went from the number one at McDonald's with a Coke to a number one at McDonald's with a Diet Coke.
Right. Yes.
And if that's the case, even though that's a wide generalization, if that is the case, you're still going to see some numbers that are of issue, BMI wise, metabolically, et cetera.
Huge confounder.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So it could be something completely unrelated that's still causing these same issues.
A general lack of health.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's already there, that one very important variable, but only one was changed.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So the punchline is, it's not that the study is nonsense. It's that it's still not the whole picture. And I did like that quote from that lady that just, we need to have a less sweet diet overall.
sure.
But that's a reasonable statement. That's true.
Yeah.
Fair
I mean,
enough.
but it's tough. It's hard to say all of these things at the same time without then like having to explain them a little further.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's tough. It's like we're saying, well, it could be a nice primary or like stepping stone intervention to introduce Diet Coke to somebody who has only drank Coke their whole life.
Right.
Like that could be a nice step. But then we're also saying, yeah, we got to make these diets as little, decrease the sweetness by, a millionfold as soon as somebody's old enough to, eat or whatever. So it is hard. And, I don't know. I think a lot of these things can be said like together, is all I'm trying to say.
People can handle a little bit more nuance than I think most of society thinks they can.
And also it's like, I'd almost feel like this shouldn't even have like made it as public as it did. It's like, this should have just been like sent to physicians or sent to healthcare facilities to say like, hey, this is potentially coming and we're not 100% sure on this yet, but there's a ton of observational data that's pushing us this way.
Yeah.
As opposed to now almost like this like hysteria amongst lay population.
Yep.
It's like what practical takeaway really is there from this?
I find these things because I'm looking at news sites and they're making press releases.
Right.
It's not like, I'm deep scouring the WHO's website for what's the latest on non-nutritive sweeteners,
Yeah.